All right, I just got a really good idea because I was talking with somebody and they asked me about budget, results, those kind of things for their particular category and industry. And I always respond back, and we did create a couple of documents that help with a few formulas that are really kind of basic and useful, but apply logic to developing a advertising budget and estimating the results based off of honestly people that are smarter than me. So this is something that I learned when I was at CBS Television. This is something that I've adopted and I utilize, and I think is just a useful way to apply a little bit of logic, and also, make sure that you're getting into a campaign that has a chance for success as well too. Now, this was originally kind of set up for traditional media, so there are going to be some things in here that are maybe ultra conservative when it comes to hyper targeted digital advertising, but it's still very valuable. And I just want to take you through the formulas so you can kind of come up with a better idea of your own advertising budget, as well as see how we apply a little bit of logic to when we get asked, well, how much money should we spend? So I actually went into an old media kit that we have that has this information in there, and just kind of move some things around so I can showcase these really two formulas. One's going to showcase the value of a prospect. It's going to showcase what your break-even points are. And then the other one is going to be a theory based off of how a campaign might perform. And then the combination of the two can indicate to you, this is how much money you should maybe be spending, what's realistic based off of information that you know and that you can provide to it, which we'll get into, as well as what should be your anticipated results and worst case and best case scenario as well too. So I'll take you through these as well. Not the prettiest thing and everything, but it's math. So I think it's pretty cool. I'm going to jump around on the left-hand side to go to a blank sheet. I also, in this document, I'm happy to share this as well too, already have examples as well too, but I'm actually going to take you through step-by-step of these, and then if you do want these, just let us know and we'll send them over to you. But there's a couple of pieces of information that as a business, you, in my opinion, should know and can provide to this start of this whole formula process. And those are average sale, gross margin on sale, and closing percentage. So the average sale, I know it might be hard to kind of determine if you have multiple things or a wide range, but essentially what you want to think about is from the advertising that we're going to be doing, what do we anticipate our average sale is based off of that information coupled with what your historical information is. So I'm just going to throw in some numbers on here. I'm going to say 5,000. And I kind of know what the examples are, so I'm going to try to come up with some different numbers to give it a little range. So if you do get this document, then you'll see something a little bit different than the example I'm giving. Now, gross margin on sales. So this is essentially how much are you making off of that $5,000. If it's a full 5,000, that's pretty awesome, but pretty rare. So figure out what that is. Let's say, it could be 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, whatever it is. If you know the exact number down to the decimal, put that in there as well too. The more accurate, the better. And if you don't really know, or in all honesty, if you do know what it is, sometimes it's better to be conservative. Do worst case scenarios. So if you are operating at a 50% margin historically, but you want to hedge your bets a little bit, it's called 45. Nothing wrong with that. There is something wrong when you're trying to pad the numbers to make it look a little bit better. So if you're at 50 and you're like, oh, but we can get to 55, don't do that. Use 50 if that's what your real thing is, or something less. Closing percentage. So, this is if you get 10 leads, how many of those are you going to close, or 100, whatever it is. On average, how many of those do you close? So let's say out of 10 leads, you get close 30 of them. Or, that's not possible. 3 of them. So you get a 30% closing percentage. Now, this first number that we have to calculate is really cool. It's really something to be excited about, because you take 5,000 in this case, multiply it by 0.45, multiply it by 0.3, and this tells me it's $675, which is our prospect's value. So what this tells me is everybody that comes into your door based off the numbers that you provided is worth $675. Took a little break because I was getting a bunch of emails coming in. Didn't have it turned on to private, but should be okay now. Anyway, even the 7 to 10 no's are worth $675 to your company, because every no you get is closer to a yes. And numbers don't lie. If these numbers are accurate, this is the value of every prospect that comes into your door, $675. Now from there, if you're thinking of an ad spend, you can kind of play around with it. So if you don't know what it is, let's say you're going to spend, $50,000. Missed the zero. There we go. $50,000 on there. But you can also do the same thing like, what if we spent 100? What if we spent 25? What if we spent $1 million? Whatever it is, you can plug it in there. Then, nice thing is you can just figure out how many prospects do you need out of that $50,000. So 50,000 divided by 675 is 74.07. I always like to round up. So we need 75. Even if it's a 0.07, I like to round it up because I don't want this number to be below. Now from there, that tells me that if I'm going to spend $50K, then I need 75 prospects, because each prospect is worth $675. That's to break even. Notice these arrows over here. Cost per lead break even point. Then down here, it's the overall break even point of what you have. This number should essentially be $50,000 and match up. Now, in advertising, this is not a good thing if you put $50,000 in and get $50,000 out. It's not a terrible thing, but it's not a good thing either. That's not what we're here for. We're here to invest, right? So we want to figure out what the break-even points are so we can figure out the later equation and logically, can we get more than 75 prospects? And then we'll figure out this next thing, which is a closing ratio factoring off of that 75. So if I have 75 prospects and a closing ratio of 30, then that's 22.5. So let's say 23 prospects, or 23 sales as well too. So this is all telling you what your break-even points is, so you know what your baseline is. If you're going to be below that based off the campaign, don't do the campaign. If you're going to be above that, that's good. All right. So we factored in the number of sales from the prospects that we need based off of your closing ratio that you provided based off of historical and estimated data. And then you can figure out, what's the gross profit on this? What are you going to make at the end of the day that's going to cover your ad expense of $50K, right? So 23 multiplied by your $5,000 average sale multiplied by your 0.45 or 45% margin means that if you get 23 sales from 75 prospects, you're going to make $51,750, give or take. Because it's based off an average sale and other factors as well. So that's good. That's your break-even points. Now we want to figure out, what about, sorry, I'm making faces. What about realistically? Like, I don't want to just put 50K in to make 1,750. I want to put 50K in to make 100K, for example. That's where I like the 1% theory. And again, this theory, and here's a filled-in example of the document. Looked like I used $500, 50%, those kind of things. The next one that I'm going to fill in is the 1% theory, which comes from a guy named Harry Dent. He's a Harvard economist who says 1% of any given population is interested in any given product or service at any given time. So if you reach a population of, let's say, estimated populated reach, I don't know, for a $50,000 campaign, realistic to say 150,000 people, not impressions, but individual people, then he would say that out of those 150,000 individuals, 1% of them is actually interested in your product or service. These numbers are built for mass media. So blanketing an entire population and doing things like TV, radio, out of home, those kind of things. This is where this kind of originated that I use it from. So whenever you're dealing with something like a hyper-targeted digital advertising campaign, which is what our specialty is, the percentages should be higher. However, the net estimated number of reach that you have might be a little bit lower. So that's something to think about as well too, because if I'm doing a hyper-targeted campaign to a B2B customer where we have a curated list, third-party data, geofencing, whatever it is that we're targeting the specific audience, then that audience there's a good chance that more than 1% of them is interested in the product or service that I'm selling versus running the same thing on, a TV station. So think about that as well too. So knowing that you can adjust these numbers, but I'm just going to use the 1% because that's what the theory says, but you can make them higher. I don't think that, if you're doing a campaign where you're targeting people and less than 1% of the population is interested in your product or service, it's not a good campaign. So 1% of $150,000 is $1,500. Now, the next step is to figure out, okay, if I have my ad campaign be seen by 150,000 people, and out of those people, 1,500 of them are interested in my product or service, is my creative message and is their interest enough for them to take action and actually contact me? And that's what the C line is interested population that actually takes action. Now this, it could be 1%. That's what I have in there. Honestly, nowadays with the kind of stuff that we're doing, it should be more than that. I was leaning on the 1%, so I'm going to bump this up to 5%. Whatever you think is logical, but again, be conservative. And I honestly think I'm being conservative. I could probably bump this up to 10%. Let's do 7.5. 7.5%. So, of course, I pick a number that I have to do math on now or use a calculator. So 1,500 people that are interested in it, we can convince 7.5% of them to actually pick up the phone and call. And that's 112.5. In this case, being more conservative, let's round down to 112. So I'm going to use the first example that we had, not the previous or the example that's going to live in here. But our closing percentage is 30%. So I'm going to plug that in. So this tells me that if I get 112 prospects, essentially, I'm going to close 33.6 of them. Again, let's be conservative, round down in this case, 33 estimated prospects close. The average sale, I have that one memorized, that's $5,000. Bump this back up. $5,000. Now your gross margin on sale, again, remember what that is, 45%. Actually, I'm going to double check that. 45%. Okay. So then that can tell me when I do this E times F times G, what essentially it's going to tell me is that if I reach 150,000 of the right audience and 1% of them is interested, which would be low for anything that like we would do, I think. And then out of an interested party, our creative is good enough to convince 7.5 of them to take action in this case. And then the closing ratio is 30%. And the average sale is $5,000. And the gross margin is 45%. You can actually estimate the amount of money that you'll make off of a $50,000 campaign, right? So you take 33 E, the estimated prospects closed, multiplied by the average sale, multiplied by your margin, $74,250. And these are numbers that I just threw out there. So you obviously got to put yourself in there. But the beauty of this is now we can actually theorize, not predict, but theorize how much money you can realistically make from a $50,000 campaign that gets you in front of 150,000 individuals. So this is a great way to assess your return, your risk, and the validity of a campaign and how it's going to be effective, just using these two formulas. So essentially this one, again, helps you find your break-even point, but it also helps you estimate, okay, well, what is the prospect's value? What are, get thinking about your closing ratios and percentages and how it's important to advertising and all that stuff. And then the other thing is the 1% theory can help you kind of theorize how many people are we actually going to get to contact us. And based off of our historical data, how many of those people are going to close? Now, there's other variables. There's other elements. There's other things that will weigh into this to where maybe this is a much maybe a very conservative gross profit, or maybe it's too liberal with it as well too. That's why it's a nice thing to play around with a little bit, but it's a great resource whenever you're figuring out a budget and assessing ad campaigns to utilize to determine, is this going to work, as well as keeping in mind, well, what are your true KPIs? There are things like, if someone's a reoccurring $5,000, to get a $74,000 gross number back to you off of a $50K investment, not really exciting. But if that means that you have a re-up rate of like 90% over time, that amplifies as well too. If it's a single purchase, not as much, and you want to see that maybe be a little bit higher, but even still not a bad return.